book I want to explore with you because it deserves an in-depth treatment, and I'm not going to be able to do that because it's so huge, is Eugene Seitz's A Great Mystery, The Secret of the Jerusalem Temple, just freshly published within the last 3 weeks. This is the embracing cherubim and the at-one-ment with the divine. The fascinating thing about this text is the scholarly accolades that come with it. It's really impressive. Seitz was a unique Mormon scholar. He's the only Mormon I've used so far in this series of videos because his unique contribution is he did not flinch, he did not shy away from, and he absolutely poured it on to find the historical context of the Bible. His other book, I can't remember the exact name, something about Mormonism as a restoration of the primitive roots of Christianity and Judaism, is 1,200 pages thick. I have that manuscript also. I've had this manuscript for about 10 years. And it's good to see it's finally published. Unfortunately, he's died last year, so he didn't live to see this published. But it's a phenomenal look into the background of the cherubim as an embracing, loving, married couple, representing God and his wife as the earthly symbol for human couples to become one with each other so that they could become one with God, both as male and female. That's the reason the cherubim had this kind of symbolism. He extended Raphael Patai's discussion in his book, The Hebrew Goddess, into another book-length feature, and he goes into far more depth and detail in most areas that Patai just touched on, because Patai took off into the Kabbalah and things like that. Seitz goes off into the New Testament great mystery teaching of Paul in Ephesians chapter 5, and discusses the Jewish as well as the Christian information. But listen to what Margaret Barker says about this book. Her accolades are astonishing. In this thoroughly provocative book, and it is, but it's meant to be. It's meant to make you think. I love books like this. The late Eugene Seitz made a detailed study of the intractable mystery of the Jerusalem Temple. Using historical sources and ingenious detective work, Seitz suggested that the cherubim in Solomon's temple were portrayed in a copulatory embrace. Aware that this thesis was not entirely novel, the author built a substantial case in its favor and traced the influence of the atonement, the at-one-ment theology, behind the concept through the periods of Israel's wisdom school, into the New Testament and Gnostic sources, up through the Middle Ages. Seitz marshaled new evidence for his controversial interpretation at every stage, and has offered his readers influential and profound conclusions to ponder when reflecting on the pregnant silence of Scripture regarding the secret places of the temple in Jerusalem. Seitz explores the world of the original temple in Jerusalem, showing how human beings became divine through spiritual union with God, a sacred marriage. He draws on basic biblical and early Jewish materials and then develops his theory with a vast range of supporting materials ranging from the ancient Near East to Kabbalah to medieval Christian mystics. He supposes new ways of reading familiar texts which have important implications for understanding the history of Christian theology and liturgy and the traditions underlying Islam. This book illuminates Marian studies, wisdom studies, Jewish studies, and the intellectual heritage of medieval Europe, and it challenges the more violent theories of atonement and penal substitution. It is a feast of well-digested learning that will be an essential work of reference for specialists, as well as a fascinating exploration for general readers. That's what Margaret Barker says about this text. That's a phenomenal reference to this book. Listen to what Raphael Patai, his very good friend, said. An important scholarly contribution to the history of Judaism, Christianity, and other religions. This is a book that you absolutely must have if you're serious about understanding the cultural context of the Israelite religion in the Bible. Listen to what the biblical scholar Steve A. Wiggins says about this book by Eugene Sage. Now, Steve Wiggins is also a huge biblical scholar on this Yahweh and his Asherah, and on this discussion of the wisdom literature of ancient Israel. He's a very serious scholar that you'd do well to familiarize yourself with. I have a few of his scholarly papers and writings in some of my other collections. He's a very good scholar. He says, one of the most salient points to emerge in the postmodernism era is the concept that the meaning of a text involves both the reader and the writer. Nowhere is this more evident than in the case of a deceased author who cannot be asked questions about his own work. It is a somber privilege to copy-edit the work of a departed colleague. In this particular case, I never had the opportunity to know Eugene Sage. I was introduced to his work in my role of acquisitions editor, and upon reading it, immediately realized its value. Now, this is a biblical scholar who edited this text. So, this pretense that Mormon scholars don't allow their own works to be peer-reviewed by biblical scholars is simply false. Margaret Barker's peer-reviewed this. Raphael Patai Raphael Patai helped him research it. They were friends. They researched it together. He told me that one afternoon when I talked to him for an entire Saturday. And now Steve Wiggins is the editor, and he says it has extreme value. When Brian Thomas sent the manuscript to me, he forwarded letters of support from the late Raphael Patai, an author whose works I have engaged in my own research. I was struck by the level of enthusiasm offered by Patai, and upon reading the document, I realized why he found the work to be so engaging. Ambitious, insightful, almost Fraserian in its scope, even daring at points, amazing cognitive leaps were made by the author. However, as a student of ancient West Asian material, I found many of his ideas fertile ground for further study, and I saw that he had developed a coherent account of a most fascinating subject. I knew that his manuscript deserved publication. So Gorgias Press published this just 3 weeks ago. It's the middle of July 2008 right now. They published it in March of 2008. And I'm just getting my copy now. He says further on page X, the material contained herein will likely be taken as controversial. It is my firm opinion. Now here's what Steve Wiggins says. So listen. It is my firm opinion, however, as a scholar of the Bible and the religious world of ancient West Asia, which this is a profound contribution to an intractable issue in both the history of iconography and ancient religion. The work, Eugene Sage's book, is thoroughly researched and presented with a keen scholarly analysis despite its surprises. It has been a privilege for me to have been included in a small way in its production. He's the acquisitions editor at Gorgias Press, and he made sure this book got published. You have Margaret Barker, the biblical preacher in the UK. You have Raphael Patai, unfortunately he's deceased now, the Jewish scholar. And now you have Steve Wiggins, who helped edit and make sure this manuscript got published because of its serious significance. I can't think of a better peer review process or a better peer review group than these three, and who knows how many others peer reviewed it. So let's not give me this mamby-pamby silly excuse for ignoring what Sage says because, oh, he was a Mormon and he didn't have it peer-reviewed and none of his conclusions are valid because he's trying to confirm Mormonism and so on and so forth. Bunk! The man was a fabulous biblical scholar. I saw his personal library. I think my library is decent. I've got, you know, a few thousand books, and